Hello everyone, welcome to the Rubber Industry Business Talk. We are here, we're talking about the Guayule rubber and how situation in Australia. We have a guest, Mr. Michael Verwey. He is the director of the Guayule Australia. So we're going to explore about information on the what is situation, how is the progress of this alternate natural rubber, and what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, how can you work with Michael in this alternate natural rubber. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Baron.
So it's a pleasure to have you, and it's also we're going to dig into your brain a little bit to understand what is going on. I think the history of the Guayule, in Australia is pretty long ago. Even it's not something very new, but it's pretty long history is there. So before we get into the this subject, what is how situation it is in Australia? Can you talk about your entry into the rubber industry? When did you get into the entry into the rubber? Yeah.
It all started when I worked in regional development in rural Australia, looking for new crops that could be grown. And I worked with the federal government to identify a number of crops. One of them was Guayule, and then I contacted the industries and say, look, do you want us to look at Guayule as an option for rubber? And they were very keen. But it's been a long process from then to now to actually start getting off the ground.
But what kind of reaction you got at the time, when you approached them?
Very strong. We did have rubber manufacturers in Australia at that time, and they were the main supporters. And so was the Australasian Rubber Manufacturers Association. So they were the bones of the rubber industry in Australia, and they were keen to look at an alternative rubber source. And we worked with them, and we worked with the government to try and get it off the ground. Our biggest problem at the time was getting seed, and we relied on getting that from the United States, and that took about 6 years to actually get the seed to start trials. But they've always been the rubber industry has been the backbone of why we even went into it.
But why did it take 6 years long to get? Is it legislations or some restrictions are getting imported into Australia?
Well, we had to build a reputation with the USDA to be able to be trusted by them to get the seed. And that took 6 years. And we also had to do a lot of research on Guayule, on all the reports that had been done in Australia from 1941 onwards, and understand what the crop was about as well. I did come into an arrangement with the Queensland University and Charles Sturt University in Australia that once we got the seed, they were going to do the trials. And we had a trial at Queensland University from 2000 to 2011. So it was a good understanding of trying to understand what Guayule was about and all the issues we needed to address.
And how is the rubber industry now in Australia? Is it growing, or is it still they're importing a lot of natural rubber from Southeast Asia? What situation like?
We have small industries here that have shown quite a lot of interest in Guayule for latex, for the health industry, and natural rubber. But the industries are very small. All the tyre manufacturers have actually gone overseas, but they're still very interested in what we're doing. Australia is a very minor player in importing rubber, but 61% of the rubber that's imported is for the mining industry, and they are a very big industry in Australia, generate a lot of wealth for the country, and they're in particular also keen on having an alternative rubber source because it's like an insurance policy. Verwey has got a few issues and you rely on one crop, and every industry relies on rubber. You've got to start looking at alternatives to, as a sort of an insurance policy, to make sure that rubber keeps coming. And that's what it all is all about.
So let's talk about your company, that Guayule, Australia. So when did you started, and what is the motivation behind? I know you've been working with on Guayule for a long time, and so let's talk about a little bit about the history and what is the purpose of it. What kind of role you want to play, in the long term. I think your objective is not only, I believe, it's not just because Australia itself. I think it's international market. Is it right?
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. We were involved at first with Dr. Cornish, Katrina Cornish, and we were actually in a company together. But in 2017, we decided that maybe we should be on our own, work out our own direction, and form partnerships that weren't restrictive. And hopefully then we could actually motivate the industry to go forward. And that has been quite successful. We are still have very good relations with Dr. Cornish and the researchers in the US. But we found that to go forwards, we needed to have companies that had the same ideology as what we did. And that is why we're going to form a partnership with Michel Dorget. Their thinking is the same as what ours is. And I believe the partnership will ensure that Guayule actually has got a very good future.
Yeah. And, we talk about these crops in Australia. I think it's a farmer's business, right? If you want to grow this kind of crops in any country, you need a support from the farmers. Their interest, it's whether it is income sourcing for them, in the long term or short term basis, So, what is the reaction from the farmers when talking about Guayule?
In 2005, Ulix Corporation, who I worked for 3 years, went into Australia to do further trials, and they were working with the cotton growers. Now, farmers are very astute in Australia. When you have a meeting, they bring out their calculators, they bring out their computers, they do their figures and their numbers, and they were keen. And we did set up a number of trials in Queensland. We did the same in Western Australia amongst the cereal growers, because they could see there was a profitable crop, not just for latex and rubber, but for the other products that could come from Guayule plant. So farmers are keen to look at it, and they do their figures. And probably the reason why it never took off before was because we were only looking at rubber at that stage. And even though it's always been classed as a profitable crop, it certainly wasn't as profitable as other options. But now it is, also as a companion plant.
So I think you can say good days may come soon, right? More interest from the farmers.
I think so. Yeah. I think so. And I think what has happened with the strategic plan that the federal government put out, and we were heavily involved in that, is it's staged, it is strategic, and it does require to build partnerships with the farmers, educate farmers, and get involved with from one end of the market to the other end of the market. And I think the important part is because government is involved now, it has a credibility to start off with, which normally you have to build that up.
And is the central government is involved in developing it, or is state? You have different states, right?
We do. We do. The federal government was the one that actually put the strategic plan together. but I have a relationship with the South Australian Department of Agriculture, and they have a research centre in Loxton, which is in South Australia, and we are working collaboratively to get the whole project going from one end to another, which includes education, which includes demonstration sites, and also incorporating new processes for agriculture so we can analyse the results and we can get more accurate figures on yields and biomass.
Yeah, so that you also get value-added products as well as byproducts.
That's correct.
Well. Yeah, so.
Correct.
And you already mentioned briefly about this the strategic plan. I think that I see the report at 2022 to 2027,
yeah.
right? Right, you know. So it's like a 5-year plan. Okay, and what are the in briefly what you want to achieve in this 5 years time? And is it, as I think you are a key player also as a part of that project,
yes.
is it right? Yeah, yeah.
Well, much of the fundamentals of the strategic plan we're already incorporating. We already have been incorporating for a number of years. What we hope to be able to achieve is use that as just a staging point for the industry. But I look at us being capable of actually setting up the first major commercial site by the year 2027 anyway. So we're only using, it has been interesting to get the feedback from the strategic plan because it is well designed and it gives a proper stage, step-by-stage step to get a good industry going that's got to have credibility and people are going to be comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the importance of the strategic plan.
And does any universities also actively involved in this strategic plan?
The University of Adelaide is very keen to do the plant breeding program. Mm-hmm. We've already come to an agreement about a 5-year initial plan. The University of Western Australia is very keen to do research on the resin because the resin is very important for the construction industry. So universities have always shown an interest in Guayule is pinpointing what part they play. And mm-hmm. we're heavily involved in working with the universities in that regard.
Okay. And when it comes to, I don't know, Guayule is for people that's have been seen it in the US in many places. Whether yields will be similar in Australia and US is going to be similar range of how can you talk about comparison about the yields, because at the end of the day how much you get a rubber, okay, what kind of value it is when you compare the heavier, you know, with the traditional para rubber. Okay, so can you talk about the yields?
In 2017 we did a business plan and we used financial figures and based on the anticipated yields that we would get. Now in 1981 in Australia, when they did dryland trial in South Australia, they were getting 1.2 tonnes per hectare of rubber. We anticipated that conservatively 1.5 tonnes per hectare. Some of the new work that's being done at the moment on Guayule is looking at exactly what type of water it requires to optimize yields. And there's a lot of work being done in the US as well to increase yield. So I think that is one area that is going to continue to grow, but because you don't rely on just one product, it is, you know, you're getting your income stream from several areas. And even if it comes to 1 tonne per hectare from rubber in dryland conditions, you have to grow a lot of it to make it feasible, and that biomass becomes very good biofuel, which you need volume for anyway.
In this, we talk about a little bit about the biomass. So I think the Australian very strong in waste to energy options, various energy conversion as well. So is it any special consideration of biomass come from the Guayule? Any waste management companies are involved in this projects as well?
Not at this stage, but I think they will be. We've been working with a US company that is trying to achieve approval for Guayule biofuel as a jet fuel.
Okay.
And that is proceeding quite well. I don't see any problem. There's been a lot of research done on using cellulose-based plants for biofuel, and I can see Guayule fitting into that quite well.
So let's do a little comparison with the traditional para rubber with Guayule. If you are actually involved, if you had to encourage industries to use it, so what are unique what USP, right? Unique selling points for the Guayule?
If we're talking about rubber,
yeah.
I think one of the things we need to acknowledge is that we don't want to take over from Verwey. I think you have to protect the growers that are involved in Verwey at the moment. But the crop, there are a lot of risks involved. There's climate change, there is the potential of viruses, which I think there is a leaf virus going through. Changing crops from Verwey to palm oil. There are all these risks that are with Verwey at the moment. And the demand for rubber is growing. The supply is not keeping up with the demand. I see Guayule as filling that gap and not taking over, but filling the gap and I think that's the way we have to think about it. You don't want to displace things, you just want to add value to it.
Sure.
And we've already done quite a bit of work we've had a lot of international rubber companies coming in contact and saying, how can we modify our processes to accommodate Guayule? And you do have to modify, but we say don't get rid of Verwey, look at blending Verwey and Guayule, and then as things progress, you may decide, well, Verwey is becoming a very risky thing, then change your options. But you have to take one stage at a time and don't just throw the baby out with the bath. You try and make things work. That's how I look at things.
And is it ever have anybody did any work on the Guayule, mixing Guayule and traditional Verwey rubber together and see how the properties looks like?
Yes, I believe Bridgestone is doing that at the moment. I think there's a couple of companies that are actually making totally Guayule tires, but blending seems to be the thing that seems to be on the table at the moment. And I think if it works, it works. We just have to make sure that industry keeps going, that transport systems keep going, so there's food in the shops, people can eat, because if there is a problem with Verwey in the future and there is no alternative, then you've got a real problem.
Yeah. But why you think is that the growth and the progress of the Guayule is so slow? It's because been talking. When I look at history, 1910, in the US when it started. But Verwey is coming only much later, and of course, because the labor issues or the vast expansion of the Southeast Asian market. What else are the reasons that the slow progress? Because the properties are, I think, pretty much better properties in certain areas, particularly with the allergens, but in the healthcare industry, there are a lot of advantages by Guayule latex or so.
Yeah. The problem has been that when there's no urgency, you don't change. Rubber was cheap coming from Southeast Asia. So why bring something else in? It is only now that they're looking at the risk factors associated, and that includes climate change as well. They're putting Guayule in as an insurance policy. And that's the same with dandelion. They're doing the same there. So it is being slow because there was no need. And we had a lot of research done on Guayule in the 40s, 50s, 1970s and 80s. But every time it was because of a crisis. It was World War II, the oil crisis, and every time there was a recommendation to take the step further. But when the crisis went, so did Guayule. In 1996, Australia's major scientific body, the CSIRO, produced a comprehensive report on Guayule, recommending a 20-year program for plant breeding and to take it up to commercial level. That was never undertaken. So it is only now that, you know, the urgency is coming in about looking for an alternative. And climate change is also forcing farmers to look at their insurance policy, which is don't just grow cotton, grow something to go along with it, so their income streams are protected. Same as the wheat farmers. So it is all starting to come together, but it's all based on urgency rather than anything else.
And you know, you already talked about this dandelion. Is also another source of natural rubber. And is there anything happening in Australia on these shrubs? Yeah.
No, not on dandelion, although I keep in contact with a lot of researchers that are involved there. And I'm not concerned because I think there is a market for all three, because each one has a different strength and a different qualities. And I think they can all fit into the agenda quite well. I think one of the things that is happening too is as oil prices continue to rise and people's attitude to oil is changing, synthetic rubber may actually be cheaper doing it with natural rubber in the future. So, I mean, when you've got over 50% of the rubber produced being synthetic, that leaves quite a margin for the three different rubber sources.
And you are with Ulex also for a certain period, right? And Ulex also very strong in, yeah, and with the Guayule, as they are also they did a lot of work as well. So what's happening in this with respect to Ulex?
Ulex is trying to build Guayule industry in Queensland. I worked for Guayule for 3 years doing a number of projects, and they need to be congratulated for a lot of the work they did in the initial stages. But I think this strategic plan where we're sort of moving the whole process forward is going to be very beneficial to Ulex as well, because once credibility is there, farmers are educated, then it is easier for them to also enter the Australian market. Farmers are very cluey, but they're also very hesitant. So they've got to be sure they're going to deal with a credible crop and dealing with credible organisations before they'll commit. And that is where working with government as well gives that edge.
And is the government is offering any incentives for the farmers to get into, because you have now the strategic plan, okay? Yep. And as part of the strategic plan, of course, at the end of the day, the farmers' involvement is the main thing, right? So that more people grow this. And is the government has some incentive plan to support this strategic plan?
Farmers don't get incentives. They look at it totally as a business opportunity. And if the business is right, they'll get involved. What we're looking at is not only the Loxton, we're looking at putting a number of sites, trials in different farmland in dryland for dryland growing. let that become the centre for that region, for farmers to have a look at, become accustomed to Guayule, learn about it, so that we can expand very quickly. Because picking the right farmers is also going to be a very important issue. And so it's all trying to mend it all together.
And you know, see, in Asia and Southeast Asia, it's all about available land, right? You know, growing the rubber industry, rubber plantation. Even in, how about in Australia? There's a lot of land available to grow this Guayule. You know, of course, people don't want to convert quickly. You know, if they have, you know, there is a called comfort zone. If things are moving forward, keep it that way. You know, yeah. So, what is the situation about land availability? How much you think is a possibility of, you know, for the Guayule? Yeah.
Australia is bigger than the whole of Europe. It is tropical as well as arid, the Mediterranean land. The majority of it in Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and even Queensland is very adaptable to Guayule. It's been trialled there, very good results. So land is no object. The other thing is, because farms are very big and they're mechanized, they can use what they use for cotton and for cereal growing, their equipment, just modified for Guayule. So there's not a major issue that you need new equipment. So land is no issue. Being mechanized is very beneficial. You're dealing with a lot fewer farmers to make a commercial crop than what you would elsewhere. The interest that France, Michel Dorget, and the American companies have in Australia is the fact that there is land, and there's a lot of land that is suitable for Guayule. So that is no issue.
So if all goes well, Australia is probably the largest producer of Guayule. You know, is it right? Because the land and the climate conditions are suitable. You know, so yeah.
We have had a lot of interest from Indonesian and European companies, and also companies from Pakistan and India, into Guayule in Australia, because I know that we have the capacity to do the volume, and that is important, because you've got to have volume to make it all worthwhile. So yes, they have already done their homework. They know that Australia is well suited, probably the most suited country to grow Guayule in volume, and that's why we're getting a lot of contacts at the moment, but they're all waiting for something definite to go in the ground. And I can understand that.
And I think even the Bridgestone, I think many of the tire companies also actively involved in growing this alternate source of, you know, natural rubber. I know that there are no companies are manufacturing in Australia now, but are there any tire companies that wanted to get invested into the, you know, Guayule in Australia?
We have. Well, Bridgestone originally was very much involved in research in the 1970s and 80s, before they went to the US. We have companies in Indonesia. I can't name the companies because I think it'd be unfair, but there's quite a few in Europe and Indonesia and India that are showing quite a bit of interest. Some of them have been here before, manufacturing. Some of them, to be quite honest, it's the first time I've heard of them. But there is a definite interest, and they've done their homework.
Super. So I see all the bright future if all goes smoothly with as per the strategic plan for Guayule. So what is the...
Sorry.
Go on. Yeah. Please.
I think one of the other things that we have to look at with the strategic plan is when we go forward, we have to recognize what skills we need to take the company even further, because I recognize I can take it to a certain level, but then you need different skills to take it even further. So that is also part of the strategic plan that we've got in place.
And is the processing is it different from the traditional natural rubber? Guayule latex?
It can be. It's usually done water-based,
Yeah.
and that is why we have a connection with the French company, with Michel Dauget, because what we'll be looking at is that technology to come to Australia for the processing, extraction processing. We also have very good relations with Ulix Inc. and Katrina Cornish's company, who have also offered license agreements if we want to take their equipment on. So it's not just us going alone. We're actually working with quite a number of international people to make sure that the capacity is there to take it further.
You know, do you think it's necessary to have an association or focusing on the Guayule, so that it can all the stakeholders come together and support this segment? Just like in natural rubber, we have ANRPC, Association of Natural Rubber Producer Countries, and there are IRSG. There are many organizations involved with promoting the heavier type natural rubber. Do you think is it good to have a kind of a group, a working group internationally, so that this can, what is your opinion there?
I would hope so. I think we have to take every step as it comes along, because I think everyone that's involved in Guayule are trying to find their feet on how to work together and how to progress. So it's early stage, even though Guayule's been around for a long time. The companies that are now taking it further are really only finding their feet on working together and how to progress that. So I'm totally open to it. And I think that is the only way Guayule is going to progress further, because I like working with the US researchers and the French researchers. I learn a lot, and they need, in some respects, me, because logistically, if they want to come to Australia, I've got the knowledge there. And working collaboratively, you can actually do very well. So I agree with you there.
So finally, I will ask about what are your goals for the Guayule Australia? How you're going to see the next 10 years of, what is your plans?
The plans for Guayule Australia is to put the strategic plan that the government has done into place. But I am looking at us being our first major commercial site by 2027, and also to start growing it under dryland conditions for rubber. We're already getting a lot of interest from mining companies who actually want to be involved in the growing of Guayule. So I think there's going to be quite a pace to get it going. It's a matter of the first step is going to be the hardest, and that's what we're going to aim for.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best, and I'm sure that I see the Guayule get a lot of progress in the next couple of years' time, particularly as you mentioned about strategic plan by 2027. I look forward to see the commercial plant, extracting the latex from Guayule. Michael, thank you
thank you very much for the interview. Much appreciated.
Okay, I'd like to keep you in contact, and so that we can share the updates on what's happening in Guayule in the future programs as well.
That'll be very good. Michael.
Once again, Michael, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your insights into what's happening in Australia. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.